Hey there. Welcome to a deep dive into this play. It's over 400 years old.
Wow.
It still feels relevant. We're looking at The Rogue, or The Life of Guzman de Alfarache, a 17th century Spanish comedy,
Oh, yeah, I know this one.
full of duels, disguises, and more romantic twists and turns than a soap opera.
That's one way to put it. What I think is so fascinating is, well, it uses humor to expose those timeless human weaknesses.
Yeah.
The things we all try to hide. Vanity, greed, and maybe a little too much confidence in our own abilities.
Okay, so let's meet our main character, Guzman. So picture this swaggering braggart who thinks he's the bravest duelist in all of Spain. He's constantly telling these over-the-top stories about his supposed victories. But here's the catch.
Oh, I know this guy.
Yeah.
He's a total coward.
Exactly. And that's where a lot of the comedy comes from, this gap between how Guzman sees himself and the reality of who he is. Have you ever known someone like that?
Oh, yeah.
Somebody who talks a big game, but can't quite back it up?
Oh, yeah. It's a classic archetype, really. And the playwright uses it brilliantly to satirize not just Guzman's, individual flaws,
Right.
but also this broader societal obsession with appearances and reputation.
Right. It's like he's holding up a mirror to the audience and saying, hey, are we all guilty of this? To some extent. We might not be challenging people to duels, but how much of our own lives are spent trying to project a certain image to the world, even if it's not entirely accurate?
It's a question worth pondering for sure. And what makes Guzman even more fascinating is his absolute belief in magic. I mean, this guy is so desperate to appear brave that he seeks out a conjurer named Francisco to make him invulnerable to bullets.
Then he's willing to pay a small fortune for this charm, which just shows you how deep his insecurities run. It's almost like he's trying to buy his way out of facing his own fears,
Right.
which I think a lot of people can relate to in different ways.
Absolutely. We might not be looking for magical charms, but we all have our own ways of avoiding uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
So let's talk about Francisco, this so-called conjurer. He's like a 17th century illusionist, staging fake duels, summoning spirits with special effects. He's basically a master manipulator.
And he sees right through Guzman's facade. He knows exactly what buttons to push to exploit Guzman's insecurities and desire for revenge. Francisco's not just in it for the money. He seems to enjoy the challenge of pulling the strings and watching people dance to his tune.
Oh, totally. He's like the puppet master of this whole play. But the thing is, Francisco's surrounded by characters who are just as eager to deceive and manipulate as he is.
That's what makes this play so much more than just a silly comedy. It's a sharp critique of societal norms and human behavior. It's like the playwright is saying, look, we're all playing roles, we're all wearing masks to some extent, but what happens when those masks start to slip?
And nowhere is that more apparent than in the play's tangled web of romantic relationships. We've got love triangles, rivalries, disguises. It's enough to make your head spin.
We have Oviedo and Parraco, these two young gentlemen, who are both vying for the affections of the wealthy heiresses Pastrana and Antonia. They're pulling out all the stops, trying to impress the women with their wit, charm, and supposed bravery.
And then there's Guzman, who's also trying to woo Pastrana and Antonia with his hilariously bad poetry. It's clear that he's more interested in their wealth and social standing than who they actually are as people.
But what's really interesting is that the women in this play are not just passive objects of affection. They're intelligent, discerning, and they're not afraid to call the men out on their nonsense.
Yes. Leonora, the mother of the heiresses, is especially sharp. She sees right through Guzman's facade and isn't fooled by his attempts to impress her daughters. And then there's Julia Leonora's maid, who starts out skeptical of Francisco's abilities, but gradually becomes more convinced as she witnesses his magic firsthand.
Her journey is particularly fascinating because it raises questions about the nature of belief and the power of suggestion. Are we more likely to believe what we want to believe, even if the evidence suggests otherwise?
It's a question that's still relevant today, right? We're bombarded with information and misinformation all the time. And it can be hard to discern what's real and what's not.
Exactly. And The Rogue reminds us that. Even the most intelligent people can be fooled by appearances and manipulated by those who are skilled at playing on their desires and fears.
So what we have here is a play that's both hilarious and thought-provoking. It's a comedy that's also a sharp satire of human nature and societal norms. It makes us laugh at the characters' follies, while also prompting us to reflect on our own behavior and the roles we play in the world.
And as we delve deeper into the play's plot, we'll see how these themes of deception, ambition, and the search for love and validation play out in increasingly complex and surprising ways.
All right, before we get into the really juicy stuff, the duels, the disguises, the near disasters, let's take a quick break, but don't go anywhere, because when we come back, things are about to get
even more interesting. So we left off with this tangled web of love affairs and deceptions, and things are about to get even more hilarious and complicated. What's fascinating is how the playwright ramps up the tension by introducing all these mistaken identities.
Right, like everyone's running around in disguises, plotting behind each other's backs, and completely misinterpreting what's going on. It's like a giant game of comedic telephone.
Exactly.
And Guzman, with his unshakable belief that he's invincible, is right in the middle of all this chaos. Remember, he still thinks Francisco's charm has made him immune to bullets.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Which leads to this absolutely ridiculous scene where Oviedo and Paraco's uncles, Salazar and Fernando, challenge Guzman to duels on behalf of their nephews.
And Guzman is thrilled. He sees it as a chance to prove his bravery and show off his supposed powers.
Of course, Francisco sees an opportunity here to manipulate the situation even further. He encourages Guzman to demand a duel with pistols, knowing that Guzman believes himself to be bulletproof. It's like setting him up for the ultimate prank.
But here's where the plot thickens even more. Francisco's brothers, Guevara and Alvarez, have decided to get in on the action. They've set their sights on Leonora's daughters, Pastrana and Antonia, and they're determined to win them over, even if it means resorting to some, shall we say, unconventional tactics.
They cook up this wild scheme to stage a fake abduction of Leonora and her daughters, hoping to swoop in as heroic rescuers and impress the women with their bravery. It's a risky move, but they're banking on Francisco's magic to help them pull it off.
Talk about a family full of schemers.
Yeah.
And the best part is, Francisco, who's already engaged to Leonora, has no clue what his brothers are up to.
Oh, the irony is delicious. You have all these characters obsessed with creating illusions, and yet they're completely blind to the illusions being created around them.
So picture this. The staged abduction is in full swing. And who stumbles onto the scene? But Guzman.
Oh, no.
And true to form, he completely misinterprets what's happening.
Of course he does.
He assumes that Oviedo and Paraco are behind the kidnapping and charges in to rescue the women, believing himself to be their valiant champion.
Oh, it's pure chaos. Guevara and Alvarez are scrambling to keep their plan from falling apart, while Guzman is strutting around, convinced that he's single-handedly defeated a band of villains.
His ego is so inflated at this point, it's practically a hot air balloon.
Meanwhile, Francisco is still in the dark about his brother's shenanigans. He's busy preparing for his wedding to Leonora and concocting this elaborate plan to reveal his true identity to her and her daughters after the ceremony.
He believes that they'll be so impressed by his cleverness and charm that they'll forgive all his deceptions. It's almost like he's become a character in his own play, convinced that he can write a happy ending for everyone.
But as we know, life rarely goes according to plan, especially in a comedy like this. And just as Francisco is about to reveal his true self, guess who shows up? His brothers Guevara and Alvarez, with their new brides, Maria and Lucia. And you guessed it. They're actually Francisco's sisters in disguise.
The look on Francisco's face must be priceless. All his carefully constructed illusions come crashing down around him in spectacular fashion.
It's like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. And the fallout is both hilarious and heartbreaking.
Leonora and her daughters are furious when they discover the truth about Francisco's magic and his brother's deception. They feel betrayed, humiliated, and rightfully so.
Oviedo and Paraco are also left feeling foolish and vow revenge, even though they were trying to pull off their own deceptions.
And Guzman
remains blissfully unaware of the true extent of his own absurdity.
But amidst all the chaos and hurt feelings, the playwright doesn't let us forget that these are still human beings with real emotions. We see Leonora struggling to reconcile her feelings of love for Francisco with the pain of his betrayal.
And we see Pastrana and Antonia questioning their own judgment and wondering if they can ever trust anyone again.
Even Francisco and his brothers show glimpses of remorse as they realize the pain they've caused. It's a reminder that even in a comedy, actions has consequence.
But amidst the chaos, there's also a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
Leonora, despite everything, begins to see Francisco for the man he truly is. Flawed, yes, but capable of love and perhaps even redemption.
And Pastrana and Antonia, though initially wary of Guevara and Alvarez, start to recognize their genuine affection. beneath their sometimes boorish behavior.
Even Guzman, in his own bumbling way, stumbles upon a genuine connection with Julia.
And Julia herself undergoes a remarkable transformation throughout the play. She starts out as this skeptical observer, wary of all the men and their schemes, but gradually opens herself up to the possibility of love and forgiveness.
By the end, she emerges as a strong, independent woman, capable of making her own choices and seeing through the illusions that surround her.
So what started as a lighthearted romp, through a world of duels and disguises, has taken a turn towards something deeper and more meaningful.
It's like the playwright is reminding us that even amidst the absurdity of life, there's always the possibility of growth, forgiveness, and genuine connection.
But before we get to the final act and see how all these tangled threads resolve themselves, let's take a moment to consider the play's broader message about society and human nature.
What are your thoughts on that? What do you think the playwright is trying to tell us about ourselves and the world we live in?
Well, it's fascinating how the play uses all this chaos and confusion to expose hypocrisy, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You see characters judging each other for behaviors they themselves are guilty of.
It's a brilliant use of satire, for sure. Take Oviedo and Parraco, for example. They're absolutely outraged when they find out that their uncles, Salazar and Fernando, have married Maria and Lucia, thinking they were rich heiresses. They called their uncles all sorts of names, mocking their age and basically calling them gold diggers.
But the irony is, Oviedo and Parraco were trying to do the exact same thing. They were totally willing to deceive Maria Lucia to get what they wanted, marriage and a hefty inheritance. They were so focused on the prize, they didn't even see the women as actual people with their own desires and dreams.
And then there's Guzman, our resident moral compass. He's horrified by the idea of older men pursuing younger women, but he doesn't see how his pursuit of Julia is driven by the same shallow impulses. He claims it's love. But it's clear he's fixated on her beauty and innocence.
It's almost like the playwright is holding up a mirror to the audience, making us question our own judgments. Are we any less guilty of hypocrisy than these characters? Do we ever condemn others for actions we might be capable of ourselves?
It's a question that transcends time and place. We all have blind spots, areas where our own self-interest or preconceived notions prevent us from seeing things clearly.
And the fact that Francisco, the supposed mastermind behind all this, is exposed as a fraud just adds another layer to the satire. Here's this conjurer who's been manipulating everyone, but in the end, he's just a guy playing a part.
Right, it makes you wonder, is Francisco truly a villain, or is he just a symptom of a society obsessed with appearances? He's created this elaborate facade because that's what he thinks is necessary to succeed.
So let's talk about the ending. On the surface, it seems like everyone gets a happy ending. The couples are reconciled, fortunes are restored. There's a lot of hugging and forgiving going on. But is it really that simple?
That's the genius of this play. It leaves you questioning everything. Have the characters truly learned from their mistakes? Or are they just going back to their old patterns?
Are they choosing to be with each other based on genuine affection? Or are they just relieved to have secured their social standing and financial security? We don't get a definitive answer, which I think is intentional. The playwright wants us to think about what happens after the curtain falls.
Exactly. He's not offering easy answers or moral pronouncements. He's presenting us with a slice of life, full of contradictions and complexities, and inviting us to draw our own conclusions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Rogue, I keep coming back to this idea of illusion versus reality. The play is constantly blurring the lines between what's real and what's fabricated, both in terms of the characters' actions and the way they perceive themselves and each other.
And I think that's what makes it so relevant, even centuries later. We live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with images and information, and it can be hard to know what to trust.
We create our own online personas, curate our social media feeds. We're all playing roles to some extent. And this play reminds us to be critical thinkers, to question what we see and hear, and to be wary of those who are too quick to offer easy answers or simple solutions.
It also encourages us to look inward and examine our own motives. Are we being honest with ourselves and with others? Are we driven by genuine connection or by a desire for status and validation?
These are big questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But The Rogue provides a framework for thinking about these issues in a way that's both entertaining and insightful.
And ultimately, I think the play offers a message of hope. Despite all the chaos and deception, there's a sense that genuine connection is possible, even if it's hard-won. The characters find their way to each other, even if it takes a few wrong turns, and some painful realizations along the way.
So if you're looking for a play that'll make you laugh, make you think, and maybe even make you question everything you thought you knew about love, deception, and human nature. The Rogue, or The Life of Guzman de Alfarashi, is definitely worth checking out. We hope this deep dive has given you a taste of the play's wit and wisdom. We encourage you to explore the full text and discover all its hidden gems for yourself